What were some of the practical programs that Israel initiated? I, for example, recall reading about an encounter between Rabbi Yisrael Salanter and Shimshon Raphael Hirsch in Germany, where Rav Salanter typically humbled himself before Rav Hirsch and was trying to figure out whether he should translate Rav Hirsch's works into Russian and bring it back to Russia. What were the practical programs that propelled him to be considered father of the Mussar movement?
Yeah, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter was totally focused on mission and not on ego. And therefore, if he felt he could learn something from anybody, he was willing to do so. He understood that Germany was not his milieu. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter is the Litvische Vilna culture of intensive Torah learning. And yet, he knew that Rav Hirsch had done wonders in Germany, which was decimated by the Reform movement. Rav Hirsch in Frankfurt built a Kehillah, and both through his writings and through his communal leadership. We sometimes don't, we're so used to Rav Hirsch as a Torah writer, we also don't realize, and actually that's his permanent contribution, but we don't realize what an absolutely masterful, wonderful community builder he was in taking Frankfurt, which had been a glorious Torah center, but had become totally decrepit in terms of orthodoxy, in terms of Torah. Rav Hirsch built it up. He revived it. He made it a glorious example of Torah true Judaism. And Rabbi Yisrael Salanter was makir that Rav Hirsch's derech Torah and derech Eretz was not the Litvische way, it was not the way of Poland, not the way of Russia, but he saw that it worked. And if it worked, if it was a way that many, many Jews would be reconnected to Hashem, he wanted to explore whether that was feasible to adapt, with some modifications perhaps. So he very much spoke to Rav Hirsch about translating some of Rav Hirsch's works into Hebrew, which would be the language of the Lithuanian Jew and the like. And he had other programs as well. Some of them never got off the ground, but he was thinking of translating the Talmud into German. He actually hired some scholars to work on this because he thought that he could expose German university students to Talmudic analyses, and that could bring them to Hashem. Again, I'm not sure that got off the ground, but those are some of the things he was thinking about. Trade schools to give impoverished people some avenues of parnasa, and of course the famous Beis Mussar, the idea that there ought to be designated areas, not just a shul or a Beis Medrash or a yeshiva, but a designated area, a separate house or a separate room that would be stocked with Sifrei Mussar, Mesilas Yesharim, Chovas Halavavos, Cheshbon HaNefesh, which was Rabbi Yisrael Salanter's one of his favorite Mussar books, in which people could come in for 15 minutes or a half an hour, and they could work on their midos and try to become a better person and engage in Cheshbon HaNefesh and introspection and speaking to God. And he wanted this to be non-elitist, although again, his Talmidim were the elite of the elite. But he wanted this to be a program and a tachnit for every simple Yid to grow in their avodas Hashem and to recognize themselves as important and beloved by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, in Mussar itself, he had two different shitos in how one learns Mussar. There is what is called Mussar Be'iyun, in which one contemplates the intellectual and philosophical nature of an idea, and you ponder it the same way you learn a sugya in Gemara, you learn a sugya in Mussar, Emunah, Bitachon. What do these concepts mean? But then he recognized that the intellect does not always transform the emotions. And therefore, he wanted there to be an aspect of Mussar that's hispalus. Hispalus means emotional arousal, in which you would take a Maimer Chazal that inspired you, and you would just say it or sing it over and over and over again, 100 times. So just like you sing a niggun 100 times, you get into it, eventually, instead of switching your niggun every 2 minutes. And that was Mussar for the purpose of emotional arousal. The idea is that repetition can put you in a certain emotional place that you otherwise wouldn't be. And he recognized we needed both of those tools. We needed the intellectual understanding of these ideas, and we needed ways to emotionally arouse ourselves. So we had, and then there was a third idea in Mussar. There's Mussar be'iyun, Mussar be'hispalos, and then there's the Mussar vad, which today we might call group therapy in a sense. But this is where you get together with chaverim and you discuss the lemaisa of Mussar. You're not just learning a book, but you're saying what I did wrong today. What did I do? I lost my temper because of so and so. And then they would discuss it. What's your trigger? What, in other words, self-understanding, self-analysis, in which chaverim who care about you would help you understand the struggles that you're going through, and you, of course, would help them in the same way. People sometimes forget that the Mussar Vad was an absolutely essential component of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter's teachings, because if all you have are these sifrei Mussar, you don't yet know how to apply it to the particulars of your life. And Mussar, above all, is about changing yourself and growing, and therefore you have to go from theory to practice. And the Mussar Vad was the great bridge that brought the theory into the actual practice of life. So these were some of his ideas. Now, even though Rabbi Yisrael Salanter was universally acknowledged as a great tzaddik and a big Talmud Chacham as well, but his Mussar plans were surprisingly controversial. One wouldn't imagine that this would generate a lot of controversy. I mean, who's against midos tovos? Who's against sensitivity? Who's against ben adam l'chaveru, where the Torah talks about v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha? And yet, there were people that were against Mussar, and I'm talking about prominent people, great Rosh Yeshivas in Volozhin, the world-famous Volozhin Yeshiva. They did not accept, so to speak, the Mussar movement. The Briskers did not, and to some degree, still do not accept it. But not because, this is very important, not because they consider the goals to be unimportant. I don't believe there's any gadol that in any way would ever diminish the goals of Mussar. But the belief of many was that limud haTorah itself will refine your character. That if you're a true Talmid Chacham and you're learning Shnayim Osim B'Talis or Shorsh Naga Kasapara, you don't need to look at other books to build up your character. The Torah itself will be machzer you lemutav, and therefore they thought that Mussar, in a sense, was undermining the intrinsic spiritual greatness of limud haTorah. So they saw it as a bit of a heretical movement in that way. And another aspect was that because Mussar focused so much on introspection and self-understanding, it sometimes did draw on psychology, certain insights that you got from even the secular world. Now, whether Rabbi Yisrael Salanter borrowed from Freud or not is still a little bit of a controversial question. Maybe it's a painful question. It's a debatable question. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter does talk about the subconscious and the unconscious, and this is around the same time as Freud. Again, just because they're both talking about it doesn't mean that one took from the other. But certainly the later Bali Mussar did. Rav Wolbe, which is already a third or fourth generation, was an apprentice as a young man to Jean Piaget, who was a prominent child psychologist in Switzerland, and he did develop certain insights from that. So as a result, some of the Misnagdim of Mussar felt that you're diluting Torah by kind of borrowing concepts from outside of Torah. So the Mussar movement was surprisingly controversial in its time. We even have some incidents of student violence in Telz, when Rabbi Eliezer Gordon, the great Gadol, who was the founder of Telz, wanted Rabbi Leib Chasman, who was a Talmud of Kelm, to be the Mashgiach and bring Mussar. Some of the elder Bachurim didn't want it. And there are unfortunate stories that they extinguished the lights and they tarred and feathered Rabbi Leib Chasman, something. Of course, when I hear that story, as sad as it is, in a sense, it almost proves the need for Mussar. We don't need Mussar, and therefore we're going to tar and feather you and throw you out of town. Well, that gufa is the raya why you do need Mussar and the like. I remember of Dov Katz, who wrote the classic multi-volume Tenuas Mussar. I remember as a yeshiva boy, single boy, more than 50 years ago, we had heard there was a companion volume that was really out of print called Polmos HaMussar, The Fight Against Mussar, which he printed separately with a much more limited circulation. So as yeshiva boys like to do, we definitely wanted to get hold of that one to read all of the gossip and the like. Eventually I did get hold of it. And again, it's interesting, it's shocking, but it shows you that Rabbi Solanter, did not have an easy going. In fact, even Slobodka, I guess maybe they'll come a little later. The original yeshiva in Slobodka was a non-Mussar yeshiva. And the Alter of Slobodka had a breakaway called Kehillas Yisrael after Rabbi Solanter, where Mussar became a very, very predominant part of the curriculum. So Jews have machlokim over everything, and even the Mussar is an example. The Chazon Ish, somebody once asked him if he was a supporter of the Mussar movement or not. The Chazon Ish said an interesting thing. He said, I am against the Shitas HaMussar, but I'm against the Misnagdim of the Shitas HaMussar even more. Meaning, he said that the proponents of the Shitas HaMussar were Gedolim, were Kedoshim, their Kavanah was L'Shem Shamayim. I have disagreement with certain techniques. The Misnagdim of the Mussar are often people who are b'dafka not acting menschlich and the lack of derech eretz. So he says the Misnagdim of Mussar are worse than whatever disagreement they have with the Mussar movement itself.